Now, a terror returned to Europe this week, this time in Brussels, only 4 months after Paris. And some of the same jihadists were involved, backed up by the same logistics team. Islamic State is on the defensive in Syria, but it's clearly on the offensive in Europe. And the security services are struggling to stop it. They're up against terrorists far better trained and determined than the local losers who carried out 7/7 in this country. And the new tactic is simultaneous multiple attacks to stretch the security forces to the limit. So what exactly is the scale of the threat now? Here's Quilliam founder and activist Maajid Nawaz. This is his take of the week.
After the Boston bombings of 2013, I made a film like this one, cautioning that Syria is looking like the new Afghanistan. And if so, it won't be long until we see the blowback right here on our streets. They want to threaten everyday things: dinner with friends, going to a concert, commuting to work. The images from Brussels earlier this week appalled but did not shock me, because as Islamist terrorists strike at another European capital, we have to call this what it is: an insurgency. We're failing to understand the sheer scale of the threat we're facing, and Brussels was just one expression of the blowback I warned about. An anonymous Belgian counter-terrorism official gave striking insight into the problem: the impossible situation of monitoring hundreds of radicalized individuals who want to wage violent jihad on us. We do not have the infrastructure to prevent an attack on our streets in Britain or elsewhere in Europe. There is only so much our already stretched security services can do. We need a full spectrum, whole of society approach to terrorism, but instead, whilst the threat is increasing, we're in danger of handing victory to the jihadists, with talk of their impact on Brexit. Terrorists are relishing having this level of influence. We've been here before. Think back to the Madrid bombings in 2004, where the Spanish government pulled its troops from Iraq in reaction, resulting in crowing from the jihadists of a victory. Responding to attacks by linking terror with Brexit in the media is a gift to those seeking to destroy our society. We must stop it immediately. We must not let any further attacks that may take place before the referendum be seen to influence the result of our vote. Otherwise, we're as good as inviting the jihadists to continue their campaign against the West.
And from an empty tube carriage in Walthamstow to minding the conversational gap here on This Week, Maajid Nawaz joins us now. Welcome to the programme.
Pleasure.
Why do you think, after all that's happened and what we now know of Islamic State's external command, are we still underestimating the threat?
There are many reasons, but I think we are simply underprepared and underestimate, in fact, the extent of the appeal of this ideology, the Islamist ideology, within certain pockets of Muslim communities across Europe. It's been festering for decades. And 800, roughly, British-born and raised citizens don't just get up and join ISIS from a vacuum. It means there must be a level of support for this ideology across our communities. And I think we're just simply not comfortable in speaking openly about this and challenging this ideology on the ground.
Well, whatever we can do to change to stop that from happening in the future, it's already happened. And if we're faced with, as a result, an insurgency, we better be prepared for a long and bloody counter-insurgency.
Indeed, and this is why the central message of this film was, look, I'm not here to tell people how to vote. My issue is, however we vote, it shouldn't be determined due to our fear of terrorists, because that's exactly what terror seeks to do. It seeks to influence our political decisions upon the whims of people, of people that have, ulterior motives, who want to sway us this way or that based upon their own ideological dogma. So I think the key thing here is for us to show resilience, is for us to show, to make our decisions based upon what we think are in our national interests and not what we think is going to stop people intimidating us.
Is Western Europe now facing an insurgency?
Well, I don't quite know how you would define that term. I'm slightly puzzled by Maajid's film. I mean, I don't quite know what you mean that we don't appreciate the scale of it. I think we rather do, and I think we rather have been quite successful in preventing a very large number of terrorist attacks. I mean, you point out yourself that these attacks go back to 2004 in Madrid, 2005 in London. What has been remarkable in that period is the number of attacks that have been thwarted. As for this quite separate question about not allowing ourselves to be influenced in the vote, I really don't quite know what that means. I mean, it sounds to me as though you think we shouldn't be exiting the European Union and you don't want it to be influenced. But of course people are going to debate their own security. I mean, that's part of the appreciation of the problem. Of course you've got to debate whether you think you're safer in the European Union or outside the European Union, just as you've got to debate every other question to do with the European Union. And I think there are very interesting points to be made on either side.
And I want to come on to that, but I just want to stick to the nature of the threat for a minute before we decide the response. Do you agree that it's an insurgency?
I'm not sure it is in the UK. I sit on the Home Affairs Select Committee and we've been taking evidence on this for a number of weeks now. I get the point that you're making, though, Maajid. I mean, what you're saying is if we are seen, never mind in relation to the referendum, but to allow terrorism affect the way we think about policy as citizens, then they have achieved their aim. But I mean, there's two things I would say. First of all, I think it's not helpful to conflate the EU referendum debate with this issue.
It's inevitable.
Well, I'll tell you why, in part because, if you look at the terrorism that's really shocked people in the UK, it's been homegrown. Free movement hasn't affected Brits carrying out these terrible atrocities. And I think the second thing is, I mean, to the extent that people wish to conflate it with the EU debate, and there's this debate as to whether we're stronger and safer in the European Union or not now. Hands on, cards on the table, I want us to stay in. But I think where those who want to stay in perhaps make a slight mistake is the argument shouldn't be, look, if we were to come out of the European Union, the cooperation we have with other EU member states, say through Europol, say for the way we use the European arrest warrant.
The real cooperation is bilateral. It's not even through Europol. It's through bilateral. French intelligence is embedded across the river with our intelligence, and our intelligence is embedded in Paris.
That's true. But it's both. But the point is, it's to the extent that this is a cross-border issue, which it is, we need the EU and these cross-border mechanisms to be more effective. And I would much rather, actually, that the UK, which has a very highly regarded intelligence set of agencies, if we are in the driving seat to the extent there is cross-border activity in Europe, then that should give us comfort, because I think generally, you're right, the French, the British and the US intelligence agencies in particular are considered to be in the Premier League, if you like.
I'm hearing two issues. I think the first is as to whether this is the extent of the threat, whether this is indeed on insurgency levels. And my intention here is to say globally it's an insurgency. Within the month of March alone, the attacks in Brussels have been the 8th of 7 other attacks, 2 in Pakistan, 2 in Turkey,
as well.
2 in Turkey, 1 in Mali, 1 in the Ivory Coast, 1 in Nigeria, and that's just in the month of March. February had its own bunch of attacks as well. So we are on a global level facing a jihadist insurgency, it's a jihadist uprising across the world.
But hang on, it's quite different though in different cities. If you look in Brussels and you look at the history of the city, and I think Saudi Arabia established one of the major mosques in Brussels, and with it came a certain kind of strand.
But the people who did Brussels and Paris are the same people.
Yes,
it's the same logistics.
What I'm saying
attitude.
is to say compare that to London. I mean, each of the different cities, I think, have different things going on. So, I mean, in some senses, it has been underestimated in the UK because people focus on that number of I think we've had 700 UK citizens go, for example, from here to Syria. What people often don't realise is that 600 have been stopped from doing the same. So
yeah, but
I'm
hold
not
on,
saying we don't have a problem with that.
He picks the point. It's thousands of British and European citizens have gone to Syria to be trained by Islamic State. According to Europol, at least 5,000. Was it wise to let them back in?
Well, I think the problem is we don't know who's come back in. We know some people have come back in. The problem is we don't know. That's the problem. And
but we don't know who's returned.
Well, our security services, what they're telling us is that they are completely overworked, and they are saying, to quote them, that an attack in the UK is almost inevitable. What I'm saying has been underestimated is the level of support for this ideology in the communities on the ground, on the grassroots. And what I'm saying we're not doing enough of is the work within the communities to actually take these ideas head on. I'm actually very happy with the fact that our security services are doing a
well, they're doing the best
sure
they can, but they cannot win every time. And
Absolutely.
The more you study the Paris and Brussels attacks, the more you realise, for all what Chuka says, the terrorists have better cross-border coordination than these intelligence services.
Well, it does appear in the case of the Belgian attacks that there have been some intelligence failures because these people were known to the police. And, of course, they've been backwards and forwards across borders.
They were stopped at one stage.
With their bombs.
And they were stopped at one stage, but the French forces allowed them to continue because the Belgians hadn't tipped them off that they were on a watch list.
And then it said that the Turks had also tipped off about one of them being deported from Turkey. But I must say I'm quite doubtful about what you think governments can do within these communities that's not going to be counterproductive. I mean, what is the magic thing that government's meant to do to persuade young men that they're being
it's not really
misled?
it's not really the role of government to directly be involved. What it is the role of government to put in place a strategy to start working, encouraging voices within the communities to start taking on some of this role themselves. We do have a counter-extremism strategy that communities and local government should be leading. Unfortunately, it hasn't necessarily been rolled out yet, though it exists on paper.
Are you talking about the prevent strategy?
So within that, there's preventing violent extremism and there's preventing extremism. I'm talking about the communities-based preventing extremism part of the work, which is to draw an analogy, the equivalent of challenging racism before it becomes violent racism.
But the problem
isn't this whistling in the wind? We have people back in this country and in Brussels and in France who have been trained.
Yeah.
They are not amateurs or people just with a grievance. They have been trained in special forces techniques.
Indeed.
That is the danger that threatens us now.
Yeah, so we have two distinct problems here. One is people who are already trained, who are operationally capable, and the other is who they're able to recruit from while they're here. And that's what happened, if we see in France. And so, some of those attackers didn't travel to Syria, they were recruited. And so we've got two distinct problems here. And what I'm arguing is that the security services in the United Kingdom have prevented another major attack. Woolwich wasn't a major sort of multiple city attack. But the level of support for the ideology on the communities is something that definitely worries me.
How are you measuring that?
Well, surveys, statistics, we can measure this. If you look at after Charlie Hebdo, 33% of Britain's Muslims expressed sympathy for attacks on the Charlie Hebdo offices. There are multiple surveys. In fact, poll after poll indicates a level of support. Another third said that killing in the name of religion can be justified.
I'm afraid we're over time. It's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yes, I fear so.
Thank you for being with us.
Pleasure.